Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany. In this video today I want to explain to you something that is very important and very relevant to the current health crisis that we have on planet Earth. One of my subscribers last week already sent me a link to a very interesting European database. It is called EuroMoMo, which means European or Euro Mortality Monitor. And they are monitoring excess mortality for public health action. That means it is a database where all the deaths of the contributing countries to this database are collected and sorted by age bracket and by country. The time resolution of this database is 1 week. And every Thursday, they say, they publish the data of the previous week. That means we are now in calendar week 15. So yesterday night, Thursday, they published the data for calendar week 14. And I guess you can already see where this is going. In the context of the current crisis, one big problem that we have right now is that our governments and our global institutions were lying to the people for so long that nobody really trusts them anymore. And I cannot really blame anyone for being highly suspicious of whatever our governments or the World Health Organization are saying right now. And this is why it is important to look at the absolute data. Many people are suspecting that some of the numbers are inflated. That means some of the people who are officially counted as victims of the China bug are actually people that would have succumbed to some other ailment anyway, but they're just counted as China bug victims. And this is why we have to look at the excess mortality data, which looks at how many more mortalities we have in a certain calendar week compared to the annual average or to this time of the year around, for example. And this is precisely what this monitor does, what this database does. This data can be used, for example, to calculate how lethal a flu wave was in a certain winter. I had a look at this data and let me tell you right away, it matches almost perfectly with what the different countries in Europe are reporting in the context of the current crisis. That means we do see a real excess mortality signal that is very significant, it's very high, and it matches almost perfectly with what the different countries are saying in terms of the time that it occurred and also in magnitude and in the local region where it occurs. So this is very, very strong evidence for the hypothesis that the official data is not that flawed as people think it is. Now, as you see on this map, the contributing countries are Scandinavia, the UK, and then Western and Southern Europe. In Germany, only the state of Hesse and Berlin are contributing here. But this is already enough because most of the countries that are affected severely in Europe, at least according to the numbers that they are reporting, are also contributing data to this European Excess Mortality Monitor database. So I want to explain to you what this database is, how you can understand the curves that they're presenting, and what that actually means for the current crisis. So let's start with the raw data plots. Here you see in absolute numbers and according to age bracket, all these countries lumped together. You see the mortalities for the different age brackets, 0 to 4 years, 5 to 14 years, and then a very large one, 15 to 64 years, and then the old-timers, 65 years plus. And then the lowest panel is all ages added together. So you see already that for the 45-year plus category, we have a mortality per week that is oscillating between 50,000 and 40,000 depending on the season. The sinusoidal background wave that you see here is actually the different seasons. In summer, you have a lower mortality rate than in winter, of course. And if you take all ages together, the mortality is around 55 and let's say 47,000 people a week. Now, if we have a closer look at the all ages signal, we see, for example, that the stratified baseline, that is an average without any out of the ordinary incidents, let's say, and this is the solid red line. It is describing the sinusoidal background due to the seasons, as mentioned before. Now, the real signal is the green solid line, and you see that there is some noise on that, because on any real data there is a certain noise contribution. And then these gray dashed lines are actually extremely important. That is a plus minus 2z zone. And z here is the standard deviation. And if you are 2 standard deviations away from the mean, for a normal distribution for example, you would only have a little bit more than 2% of the data points left outside of this corridor. So in other words, this plus minus 2z zone is the zone where almost all of the data points are in. And that is, of course, if nothing out of the ordinary happens. Because as you can see, each winter we have on top of this background signal that has some noise and is more or less in this gray dashed corridor here, we have substantial peaks in mortality. And in recent years, that was a flu. It starts in the end of the year, as you can see. It starts peaking in December, and it is already gone before March or during March. This year, however, it looks different. The signal where the flu is supposed to be is teeny tiny. For the winter 2019-2020, you see a tiny signal. Well, it's not that tiny. It actually goes well above the 4z zone. That means 4 standard deviations higher than normal. Keep in mind that a flu can actually bring the signal to up to, well, I would say something like 20 standard deviations above the norm. And as you can see in the winter of 2016-2017, that would translate into almost 20,000 mortalities per calendar week. Of course, for all these countries taken together and for all age groups. But this year there is almost no flu signal compared to these recent years where it was much more pronounced. But this year there is a very, very strong spike that comes at a much later time in the year, highly uncharacteristic for a flu. And this is actually starting at calendar week 13, and calendar week 14 also shows the same magnitude. I was looking at the calendar week 13 data already earlier this week, but I thought, a single data point, I really don't want to talk about that. But if it reproduces, if the trend goes on or it even becomes stronger, then I will definitely make a video about it. And here I am. So what does that tell us so far? It tells us there was a very steep increase in mortality in the last 2 weeks in northern, western, southern Europe. And bear in mind, there is no testing or diagnosis or nothing going into this. This is just the pure mortality numbers. Data doesn't get much more pure than this. So we can also look at a different representation, and that is the so-called z-score graph. That is a representation in which the oscillating seasonal background signal has been normalized for, and the y-axis is not plotted in absolute mortality numbers, but it is expressed as a normalized local standard deviation. I already explained the standard deviation z before, and this is just that. So if a peak would assume a value of 20 on the y-axis, it means that at that calendar week there was an excess mortality spike of 20 standard deviations more than what is usual at that time. And you can see for 2020 calendar week 13 and 14 that this is actually over 20 standard deviations. This is a clear, substantial signal. And even for relatively younger people, 15 to 64, you still see that spike, as is also the case for the flu, for example. And here one can even look at a map of Europe where the different countries are color-coded by calendar week. There is this sliding bar down there where you can go to a certain calendar week from the last 4 years, and the color now represents how many standard deviations the excess mortality corresponds to. Now bear in mind the highest score here is above 7, but we saw that we have scores of up to 20 right now. So this dark blue color means a lot of excess mortality. And as you can see, this is precisely in those countries that reported a lot of China bug positive tests, and a lot of China bug victims have been officially reported from these countries. And if you go back to the raw data, so the raw mortality numbers, you see that when you take all ages together, this spike that we see now, it roughly corresponds to 15,000 people per calendar week. And if we just add the numbers of the countries that are most affected, like the UK and Belgium and Spain and France and Italy, we actually get to such a number. Of course, this is only a rough comparison, and as I said many times, the precise number to the last digit is not really important here. What matters is that what we see in the overall mortality data is actually matching quite nicely with what the different countries are reporting right now. If you just add together the different bar charts from calendar week 13 and 14, of the countries that are most affected right now, you actually see that these values agree pretty nicely. It is actually impressive. So before I want to wrap this up, I want to say I don't really care if you subscribe to me or if you agree with me or if you support my channel. But I think this information, this video today is extremely important. So even if you dislike me and you don't want to promote my videos, at least I urge you to share and pass on this database here. The URL is of course down in the description below, and I think this excess mortality data is really vital information that must be shared with people, because it shows clearly that there are in fact more mortalities than usually this time of the year. And therefore, the number of victims that the different countries are reporting to us, these are not cases that would have occurred anyway and they are just ascribed to this new thing. No, they are coming on top of the mortalities that we usually have at this time of the year. So please at least pass on this information. But actually I think this website might not be self-explanatory to the layperson, and I did my best to explain the different charts and the different figures that are being presented. So maybe this video could be useful nevertheless. Please consider sharing it with as many people as you can. Because I think even if you are a hardcore skeptic and very critical, rightfully so I should say, of what globalists and the government are telling us, this data needs to be addressed by the skeptics. And it needs to be addressed in detail, in a quantitative manner. Big shout out to my subscribers and my supporters. If you like this material and my channel, like, share and subscribe, and consider making a donation via PayPal or supporting me via Patreon or Subscribestar. Alright, stay safe wherever you are, and especially at this time, stay healthy, stay vigilant. Servus, Kameraden.